soon as Rob sits down, we're going to start. Well, first of all, I'd like to say we are so delighted that you're here. You have no idea. We thought maybe 3 people would be here, so we're so delighted to see a nice audience. So thank you. So I'm going to start out the talk tonight, and then we're going to kind of go down the line here. So you'll be watching, not us, because we would rather not, but we've got a nice slideshow for you to look at. So the first slide is my slide, and what I'd like to say is, with historic in the title, you might notice that we're into being historic. But what is historic? Different things for different people. It could be just an old building or structure. But what is old? These are the things we ask ourselves when we study a building, structure, or landscape. And my name is Tamis Donaldson, and I am the chairperson of the Historic District Study Committee, HDSC for short. There's another wing to the historic preservation at the city, and that is the Historic District Commission, HDC for short. The HDSC and the HDC consist fully of volunteers, and we are mandated by the local ordinance to follow established rules set by the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO for short, and the Historic Preservation Branch of the National Park System, NPS for short. As you can see, there's a lot of abbreviations. The definition of old is more than 50 years. This is actually a pretty broad range, as it brings us into the mid-1970s. For historic designation, we follow the SHPO manual, which refers to the NPS criteria. The criteria establishes significance, an important event, person, or architecture. To be eligible for historic designation, you need both old and significant, which brings us to the Vinsetta bridges. They are both old and significant, which we would talk about during the presentation. At the HDSC, we conducted a study, wrote a report, presented it to appropriate officials. It was approved by the City Commission, and now the Vinsetta bridges and the median that connects them are officially historically designated. Historical designation properties and buildings do not need approval for routine maintenance. In fact, routine and ordinary maintenance is strongly encouraged. However, if there's a proposed change, it would go in front of the HDC for review, and they will determine if the change is appropriate. Once a historic structure has been designated, then the HDC has finished with their task. The Vinsetta bridges are a special case. Owned by the city, which really means all of us, we realized that the bridges needed some help. So we put together the Vinsetta Bridges Task Force, consisting of 3 members of the HDC, 3 members of the HDC, and our city liaison, Carol Schwager. The task force is working on a few programs that you will see in this presentation. Also, we would like you to be informed, and therefore we've invited you to this town hall meeting. Our task force speakers will fill you in with history and facts. Plus, we have a special guest, Steve Shotwell, who owns a Model T that you probably saw in the parking lot. And what is the significance of that? Well, that is the year that the car year is the year that the bridges were done. So it all ties in. So our next speaker is Chris, and he's our master researcher, and he's going to be talking about history.
Oops, wrong way. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Kraska. And as Tamis said, I'm part of the WROK Historic District Study Committee, and I'm one of 8. And we are charged with the mission of identifying, researching, and studying potential sites here in Royal Oak. And we are appointed by the Royal Oak City Commission. 2 years ago, we were given the fantastic task of researching these bridges, and it's taken about 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. It's taken a while. And in that process, just producing wonderful reports and information for you. So let's go to it. Let's go back to 1904 when the history starts on this area. And at the time, Royal Oak was a quiet agricultural area, but it's right on the edge of Detroit and on the boom of the architectural growing and needing plants, people. And so, and then the Henry Ford plant is going to be built in Highland Park very close. But there was something else that was also important about this location on Woodward and Catalpa. It was on the DUR, and if you don't know what that is, it's Detroit Urban Rail. And what that was, it's surprising to us today, it was a transportation system that started from Detroit, and it was public transportation that you could get out to Port Huron, to Pontiac, Ann Arbor, and it interconnected them all together so you could have public transportation at the time to get anywhere in Metro Detroit. Now, it was done away with because of the auto industry. They wanted us to buy cars, so they didn't support it, so it was taken out. But anyway, at the time, in 1904, this property was right on that railway, so it was a close hop to any place that you were going to get a job to. So it was a good investment. So there are two families that would actually invest in this, and you're seeing the one on the screen, Arthur Bassett and his wife, Elizabeth. And I wanted to put both of them on there. Usually we just talk about Arthur, we never talk about his wife, but it's a team that they actually both own the company. And so what he is he owns a company that does mortgage, he's a mortgage broker, he's insurance, and he's also an real estate investor, and he was very successful. So he's one of the people that buy it. The other one is George J. Vincent and his wife, Rose. George's father's name was Warren, and they owned a large construction company in the city of Detroit, and George would be his son. His father's going to pass away real soon. But he owned one of the largest construction companies in the city of Detroit and would build most of the large projects that are going on there. But later in his life, he's getting into real estate investments. So he also gets in to buy 50% of this land in 1904. And so what this is, and what we do when we research this is a lot of times there's not exact proof of what's happening. So what we were able to find in the paper, you can find a deed, it tells you things, but you can actually go in the newspaper. Both Bassett and Vinton were very popular in the press at the time. So for example, if you were looking up Vinton and you're looking in the newspaper from 1900 through 1916, there are 1,300 articles on his company alone. So you have to sort through that and get the articles that are most relevant to us. But here we can find an article that's from the Detroit News, and it's telling us that the property is purchased in 1904, and that it's Bassett is exchanging an apartment building in Detroit and buying the land. So it's an interesting article telling you actually they're buying it and they're buying it for an investment. It doesn't mention Vinton in the article, but Bassett and him did buy it, and we do have the deeds that tell us that they do this. And then right away they split the land into two pieces. And so the first thing that happens is in 1904, the Bassett family moves two properties. At the time, they're on the west side of Woodward, and they're going to move them across to the east side. And in 1904, what they did, and this is per the family, what they've told us, they moved these two structures. They have to do them at night, and they have to do them in the wintertime because the DUR doesn't want to shut down their rail line, and they have to take the lines down to do it. So they do it in the middle of the night so they don't disrupt their schedule, and they move these two structures. So they're the first two structures on the property that we know of. And so the first one is a smaller home, and it's still in existence, and it's behind the home that you see here at 104 Bassett Road. So the house is built in front of it, and behind it is the small portion that they lived in first, the Bassett family, before the larger home was ready to move into. But today it's a kitchen, and it's still there today. And the next home is the larger home that they moved, and this would be the Bassett home, and this is at 1724. The next property, or the next structure on the Vinsetta Park area is the Vinton home. And this was always built as a vacation home. And it's probably constructed by the Vincent family. We don't have their records, so we don't know for sure. And most likely it's built between 1904 and 1908. No building records at the time, so we really don't know for sure, but pretty good guess because they didn't own the property before 1904. And the newspaper, we have newspapers from 1907 on, and it's not mentioned in the newspaper. And these people were famous, and if you built anything, it would have been mentioned in the paper, because anything they did, whether it's going on vacation or someone was sick, it was in the paper. So it's most likely built in that time frame. So the next things that are happening on the property is both the Bassett family and the Vinton family were very active in the Baptist church. So this article appears in the paper where you can see that they're going to a campfire for their church in Vinsetta Woods. So it's the first time that we can actually document that they mix their names together and they call it Vinsetta. So mixing the names Vinton and Bassett together to get Vinsetta, and it's happening here in 1905. So most likely they had plans of developing this property back then, but it's the first documentation we have that they actually put the property together and they call it Vinsetta. So it's a nice article. But what's happening at the time, if we can get this to move up, is Detroit and especially Royal Oak is going through a boom. In 1910, Royal Oak's population is about 1,000, but by 1920, it's grown up to 6,000 people. So a demand for development and houses in the area. So we could see why they would develop this property in 1915. Unfortunately, George J. is going to die in 1910, and George Bassett Sr. is going to die in 1916, so they're not going to see the projects through that they probably planned, unfortunately. But their kids do. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the Vinton building. And what it is Robert Vinton, George J.'s son, built this building. And in the same building, the Bassett family has their company. So they both work in the same building. The Vintons built it. They have their company there, and the Bassetts would. So they continue to work together after the two older men pass away. And then later, even in the 20s, we see here, this is the Washington Square building. Bassett works here, and he is actually the management company, and he's the president, and Robert Vinton is the vice president. So they still continue to work together all the way into the 1920s. So good collaboration. But now on this one, and we're going to look at this slide just for a little bit. And what happens in 1915 is they hire a man named Mason Brown to design their subdivision, an important man for us here in Metro Detroit. So what you're seeing on the screen is the plat. And this is even published in the paper to say, hey, this is what we're doing in here, and we're going to build this subdivision in 1915. This is in November, and the subdivision is going to open in June of 1916. But on here, you're seeing his plan for the area. So Mason Brown, who is he? And how important is he to us? And he's really important to us because he starts off in Boston. In Boston, if you don't know it, it's where we have, and it's going to sound odd, but it's where we first have the cemeteries that we know of today, where we want it to be like a park, serenity. We want a relaxful place. In the past, we didn't do that in the United States. We would just cram them in and just have one after another. But in Boston, they come up with this idea that we want a park. And why that's important to us is he starts his career in Boston and he comes here to Detroit. And when he comes here in Detroit, he specializes in creating these park-like settings, either be a subdivision or a cemetery or someone's personal home. And so, for example, the big cemeteries that he did would be Woodlawn, Forest Lawn, and Holy Cross. But he would create these park-like settings for us in these locations. And so here we have a wonderful Vinsetta. We have an example of a subdivision that he did that still exists. And what he's known for is he's going to take the environment and he's going to enhance your environment. So here we have the river. He's enhancing it. He's putting our main boulevard going down the river and roads going off of it. But also at the same time, there are two movements that are going on that are important for us in Vinsetta. There's one that's called the Garden City School of Design, and that starts in London. And what's important about that is the first thing, they're pushing against grids. They don't want grid streets anymore. They want them to be curved streets. They want them to be irregular shape line. When you hear this is everything we have in Vinsetta Park. Irregular lot sizes, reduced population density, larger lots. And then they want to increase green space in the area. So it's something that's pushing, and it's kind of a movement that's going across the United States, and he's kind of taking this and showing us it here in Vinsetta. And then there's another movement called the progressive movement, and it's kind of the same thing, but it was more about they wanted to push back on the industrial age. So again, push back on the grid, give us more green space, give us more embracing public spaces. If you think about it, at the same time, Belle Isle is done the same way, Central Park, and it's all based on these ideas. So both these ideas are actually based on what you're seeing here in Vinsetta. So if we go back to it and you're looking at Mason Brown's idea to create the park was, again, a layout that's based on that Ghost River. We're calling it a Ghost River. It's still there. It's just buried. But we're fortunate that it's a green space and we can still appreciate the river because it's still there. And the best part is the bridges are still there. So it kind of gives us this impression of what this river is. And if you're looking at the streets are all flowing off this river, and it all, they're like tributaries that come off a creek, and they all flow us back to that river and to that green space in the middle. And he did a very successful job here. You can see very straight streets, and the only straight streets we have are around the Bassett home and around the Vinton home because they would do their house later. But everything else is flowing off from that, a nice flowing us all back to that river and that green space, and irregular lots, of course, curving streets. So he took advantage of all these ideas that we know of at the time that they were saying in the United States, do this, don't do a grid. Create green spaces for people to make them more livable for us. And so that's what he created for us. And on this one is one of the only photographs we have of the bridges. And what you're seeing is a photograph from the newspaper, and it's an ad saying, hey, come live here in Vinsetta. This is at Woodsboro and Vinsetta. And what's nice about this shot is you're seeing the bridge as it actually was built. So you're seeing the river, you're seeing the arch. And again, we don't have building permits, so we can't prove when this was built, but we almost have proof. At the same time, in 1915, there's a gentleman, and he's on his way to work. The trains, of course, used to run along Woodward and Catalpa. Well, this gentleman, unfortunate for him, he's getting off the train, he's drinking his coffee, he's not paying attention, and the trains went in both directions. So when he gets off the train, he walks in front of the other train, and he's killed instantly at the time. But in that newspaper article, it says he was working for a company that was building bridges for a Royal Oak subdivision in the area. So we know that the bridges are being built in 1915. A lot of times when you build a subdivision, you're selling a subdivision. It doesn't mean that they're there. It doesn't mean anything is there. It's just saying, hey, we're going to do this for you. And they're trying to get people to come to the area, so you have to prove it that they actually were there. So this proves that the bridges at least were there in 1915, 1916 when it opens. And this is a good slide, too, to talk about the bridges. Now, we'll get into more detail later, but if you're looking at the bridges, we're told that they're designed based on the size of a Model T. So they're only a single-lane bridge, and so they're not that wide. And so on here, you can see that it's reinforced concrete arched short span. The river's not that big of a span, so it's a short span. And then you're seeing that it's a closed spandrel arch, and what that means that the spandrel that's going like in an arch shape is solid, so it's not open. And then, of course, on the side, you're seeing the sidewalls, and those are called parapets. And we'll get into more detail on the bridge, but this is a good slide to show you actually what they look like, because when they're buried today, you can't get the impression that it was a bridge. But here shows you exactly what it looks like. So in the subdivision, it opens in 1916 in June. And so the first homes that are built in Royal Oak are actually the houses on Sunset. And this is the very first one built in 1916. And it's built by a builder in Birmingham, a developer in Birmingham, who wanted to build 3 houses. And actually, he builds 5. So this is the very first one, which is built in 1916. The next house, which is a mirror copy of it on the opposite corner, is built in 1917. And the last one, 1917, which is a Dutch colonial. And there's a copy of it, too, because he builds 5 in a row, and they're all on Vinsetta. The next house built, and you're going to see the difference between these 2 houses. Now, this one's built on Vinsetta. So when you look at it, you're seeing a picture from 1923 saying, hey, this is the beautiful house that we can give you if you come here. But this house is different. It's a Dutch colonial, but you're seeing a slate roof. It's a little bit larger roof, but this is on our main boulevard. This is on Vinsetta, and this is the first house that's built on Vinsetta in 1919. And then this is going back to those bridges and the lights. Originally, there were lights on the bridges, and I had to blow up the photograph from 1923, but you can see the light on the bridge with the globe at the top. And then we were fortunate that one of the neighbors on Woodsboro found these in their garage, and they reinstalled them on the street. And we're just fortunate that they did, because here we have the lamp base of actually what was there on Vinsetta. Now, the lantern on the top is not original, because we know it was a glass globe. But we have what it was like, and we have a picture of what it would have been in 1923, so we have both of those. And then on the bridge, you can see, and if any of us, most of us see this, you can see these metal things, and we're all like, what in the world is this? But those were the base for those lights, and you can see where it was electrified in the middle. But they're still there today, but of course the lights are gone. on them. And so on this, so again, just to sum up, you know, really, why are these bridges so important? And why are they significant? There are 3 subdivisions that are just like this in Metro Detroit. Palmer Woods, which is built first. The next one is Royal Oak, which is ours, is Vinsetta Park. And the next one is Huntington Woods, the Hill District. And they all copy the same idea, where they're going with this garden park design, and they're beautiful subdivisions where they have irregular lots, curved streets. But why we're different is because of the bridges in that river. Everything is based off that river, and it's based off these bridges. And we're very fortunate in Metro Detroit, where there is nothing like this in Metro Detroit that survives. Because they're narrow bridges, they were all torn down. Or people don't like the hump because your car bottoms out when you go over it fast. So unfortunately, all of them have been removed, and we couldn't find any examples in Metro Detroit, and these are the only ones left. And so it's what makes us different from any other area in Metro Detroit. We have the bridges, we have the wonderful design in our subdivision, and this all backs it up. And I think here we have something else with historic designation, is we have something different here. We have something that not only creates a visual and a tactile experience for you, not only can you see it and you can see the bridges and you can go down and you can see the green space, but we can drive over that bridge and we can feel the bridge and we can feel that experience. Thanks. Yours.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Thank you. My name's Steve Shotwell, and I'm really kind of an invited guest here. And what I'd like to do is pretty much address a few different topics in a short period of time. One of them, give you a little bit overview about historic preservation from my perspective, and some of the things I've been involved with, even in Royal Oak here, as well as some other places. Also want to give orientation to the Model T. We've made reference to the fact that these bridges quite often have been considered to be dimensionally and structure-wise made for Model Ts. So I'll give you a little bit better insight of that automobile. And then also I have some overall advice, some things that I've worked very hard on in terms of working on funding from other sources to support some of our visions and hopes. And I thought that might be of some interest and value, you know, to the group. So first of all, you don't have to read, I'm not going to read to you all the things that are here, my experiences, but what I want to really capitalize is the first one, where I say a former Royal Oak resident. Took a calendar out. It was actually almost 50 years ago this year. I bought a home not too far from here. 728 12 Mile. It's about 2 blocks away from Vinsetta. I was in my early 20s at that time. Do the math, I'm getting old. And bottom line is that if you're on 12 Mile, there's a home that's all built out of stone. That's the home that I bought. And I'm going to tell you, it's one of the most exciting homes that I've ever had in my life. It's really interesting. And by the way, the next time you drive by there, it's kind of between Crooks and Cherry Street. Cherry Street's an angle. I see a lot of heads are nodding. You know where it's at. The next time you drive by on Cherry Street, if you look in the back, there's a deck on the back that actually lifts up, and there's a garage that a Model T barely fits into underneath the home. So there's a little secret for you to learn about that. But the thing that happened to me in buying that home, even though I was a very young age at that time, is a tremendous amount of learning as it relates to what does historic preservation really mean. And it's a responsibility, it's a gift, it's a privilege. All those words fit into it. And that home, I knew that I couldn't just go in and do anything that I wanted to. I had to be careful. I didn't have so many things in the city that they were concerned about what I was going to do, but my own feelings about the house, etc. And I also have to throw in a little tidbit here that if it wasn't for Frentz's Hardware, I don't think I would have survived. That is the finest hardware store. I still go. I don't live in this community anymore, but I still go to Frentz's Hardware when I need something. And I think on the building, it may still say it, we have it. And I just, I love those people. And I used to work with their father there quite a bit back in my days. So anyway, that's basically what I have in mind. And you see some other things. Basically, historic preservation is it. I didn't put it up here, but I've worked at Greenfield Village. I restore Model Ts. Model Ts are kind of my life. Right now, I'm working my full heart and soul at the Paquette Museum, which is in Detroit, which is the very building, Ford's first factory that they ever built, that the Model T was invented in. And indeed, if you ever have a chance to come there and you want to learn more about Model Ts, I have 67 of them on display, some of the oldest cars in the world. It's just absolutely fantastic. And you learn all kinds of things about the culture of that day, as well as Model Ts and how they were built. But it just really, really makes it exciting. Let's go on down. Again, you can read those things that are there. I've had a lot of fun in my life. If we go to the last one, there's a Model T sitting out there. That's my pride and joy. It belonged to my grandfather. It was lost out of our family for more than 25 years, and I got the car back, and it has changed my life. And that's why I've been involved in some of those other things there. Again, all those things I'm sharing with you are about that passion, that love, that respect that comes up when you have something that you know that's very important. And Paul, I think you were attending a session that I was doing at a recent historic preservation conference. And it was there when we kind of learned our common interest in Royal Oak, et cetera. And that same thing exists there. I'm very involved at the state level. I think you're going to learn in one of the slides coming up about the State Historic Preservation Office that gives us the guidelines. The National Park Service is the one that publishes and monitors things that you're going to do and not do, to anything that's inside of a historic district. The thing that I want to do for this group right here is commend you. There's a whole notion, but it's a long process to become involved with a historic district. First of all, you want to qualify that district, and then, of course, you'd like to get some funding to help you with that. You're going to develop a vision for what you want to do. And I applaud all the research and everything else that you're doing here. All those are essential building steps to be able to get to actually doing the things that you want to do. And various people get engaged. The thing you don't want to do is start the process and say, let's go out for funding right now because we know what we want to do. Well, wait a minute, let's get our act together. Let's make sure that if we can get our facility, or in this case, these bridges, properly qualified as being historic items, that is going to help you a lot. In the case of Paquette Avenue plant, we became a National Historic Landmark, and that was our ticket to be able to get a lot of grants. Grants have helped us tremendously. I'm right now project managing a little over a $10 million project to renovate that particular building. I don't have that much money right now, but we've collected $3.5 million. And as you're going to see a little bit, I'm going to share with you how we've been able to collect some of that money from government sources. And that would be my hope and my wish for you guys. The other thing I'm doing is, Paul and I just had a really good conversation. What I want to do is promise my help for free in terms of learning about any of the things, the do's and the don'ts as it relates to getting there. We've painfully gone through some of those steps, and I would love it if you would be able to benefit, from that. So back to Grandpa's Model T, the Model T that you see out there. The car itself is, oops, today's wrong one. Uh-oh, it's not black, is it? And somebody said, you can have any car you want as long as it's black. Actually, Henry didn't even say it. He said throughout his life he didn't say it. All the Model Ts between 1909 and 1913 are red, green, or blue, or some of them off-white. It wasn't until the moving assembly line started in Highland Park in December of 1913, making the 1914 Model T, that they all turned to black. And then eventually he is going to turn it back and do some other colors in it later on. But he made over 15 million of them. And that's why that car became the #1 selling car in the United States very, very quickly, and very quickly after that in the entire world. A lot of people don't know it, but there are 41 assembly locations for the Model T, 20 in the United States, spread around the entire United States, and 21 in foreign countries. Yes, even in Berlin, Moscow, and Japan, and a variety of other places that we're going to have some interesting history to as time progresses. You don't need to know all those details, but the ones that I think are significant for you is what's the size of this Model T, et cetera. Those 15 million are all about the same size. They're about 12 feet, 6 inches long. They're a little over 6 feet wide, and they all weigh about 1,250 pounds, very lightweight. One of the reasons Model Ts are successful is that they were very lightweight, very durable, and very cost-effective. Most cars in its day were selling between $2,000 and $3,000. Model Ts first came out for $950, and eventually he was selling new ones for $260 when we get to the moving assembly line going. And that's why it became such a popular vehicle. And that's also a huge change. A lot of the early cars were big and heavy, and you had to hand crank them. And unfortunately, a lot of women had a lot of difficulty hand cranking it. Well, guess what? They started putting starters in it, and that changed everything. That changed everything because that meant that women were now a lot more involved in making a decision on what kind of car they want to buy, because they can drive it, they can start it. Before, it was this guy that was buying the car, and he was the one that was really to do it. Now, the whole thing about travel, et cetera, was extremely important. That brings us back to the stone house that I'm in. I know for a fact that the original builder of that home, it was built in 1921, by the way, was a man who had a insurance business in downtown Detroit. This was the suburbs. They didn't call it the suburbs. This was the country, out here. And he would take his Model T and drive it all the way out here to Royal Oak in his vacation kind of a home. And that's what he used for relaxation. So we can see there's another example where that car that was very cost effective, that also could make that kind of distance and no problems whatsoever, became very, very practical, et cetera. Okay, the last slide I want to share with you is to give you some hope. If you follow the vision that you have right now, and by the way, I work on the policy of plan your work, work your plan, and that's what these people are doing right now. You're doing great with that. If you follow that whole thing about looking at getting your vision right now properly endorsed as being historic, et cetera, and you're making it eligible, I shared with you I'm doing a $10 million project. The National Park Service has a variety of grants available. I can help you to go to websites that will show you millions of dollars every year that this federal government provides in the area of historic preservation. Those are the things that we want to capitalize on, for Royal Oak right here. They have one particular one that you can get for, it's called Save America's Treasures. That's the one that I was successful in getting a year and a half ago. I haven't started spending that money yet because they know if you get that money, it's going to take you a while to do all the finished planning as well as implementation of it. So the bottom line is, with National Park Service, they have one grant that they have that's their highest amount. They have a lot of them that are lower amounts because not everybody is doing these mammoth. The highest amount you can get is $500,000. I'm pleased to say Fort Piquette Avenue plant got that particular grant a year and a half ago, and we're working towards it. We also received another $500,000 from the National Endowment for the Humanities. That one probably will not fit for you quite as well, but I'm doing an elevator that's legal for passengers to be in. Think about what I'm saying. I have an elevator now, but I can't legally put people on it. And we're building bathrooms. Those are the things, think of ADA, et cetera. So those are the ADA kinds of things that fit into that niche. They probably wouldn't be interested in bridges, et cetera. But the third one that I show here, Michigan Arts and Culture Council, and Royal Oak may already have some experience with that. They offer much lower cost kinds of things, but some of these, the last two I'm sharing with you, can even help you with fundraising costs or even with design costs. Whereas I go to the National Park Service, they have rules where you can't use it for fundraising, their monies. You can't use it for architects. You have to have your plans already done. So I can help you with navigating through those ones that are inside of there. And I look forward to being a part of this project, whenever you need it. I'm hoping that when this comes to fruition, you can be calling me, knocking on my door. And my vision is, wouldn't it be fun for me to bring a whole bunch of Model Ts? I'm in charge of Model Ts, by the way, around the world, okay? I do the chapters in foreign countries as well as here. And I would love to bring just a huge contingent of them, and we can be driving around amongst your newly restored bridges. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. All right. Get some pictures of the Model T here. Okay, my name is Dasmin. My background is in architecture. I currently work in the construction department at the Detroit Zoo, and I'm going to be talking about the current site conditions of the bridges. So we've got, going from north to south, if you follow the north arrow, we've got Mayfield, Greenleaf, Woodsboro, and Cedar Hill. So why do we need 3D scanning done for these bridges? How can we document them? So if we learn how these bridges were built, we can learn how to fix them. So this shows the disrepair of the bridges, and while one may be too far in disrepair, we can employ methods to reconstruct the remaining bridges. It's important to document the current conditions of the bridges to establish where we are in the process, and also documents can serve as future construction drawings. These drawings also serve to give information to bidders when we rehab the structures. Okay, so how did we perform these scans and how do they work? So here's a photo of them scanning. So we used raw 3D Design Inc. to scan the bridges to determine their current conditions. So we can visually see the deterioration from above the ground, and now that we've done these scans, we've got them accurately documented. So these 3D building scans work with some specialized software that directs a laser around an object, and a pair of optical sensors measures the reflected lights, the distance, and the orientation. So these scans let us know the extent of the above ground conditions. And here's the documented scan, so we can see their current condition, where they're leaning inward, where the deterioration is located at. So that's all of them. Okay. And from these 3D scans, so these established where we're at in the process, and for the next steps, we are going to learn about the below grade conditions. So in order to do that, we would need to dig. We would need to use different kind of machinery and employ a structural engineer to determine if the structural integrity of the bridges has been compromised or not. And going into the next steps.
Hello, good evening. My name is Paul Bastian. I have been a lifelong Royal Oak resident, minus a couple of years. There's proof. I grew up on 1830 Cedar Hill. That home does not look like that anymore. There have been some significant updates, but my family lived in this home from 1968 until 2018. So this is my childhood home. The Vinsetta bridges are a fixture of my childhood. You wouldn't imagine how much air a 8-year-old child riding a bike down Cedar Hill up over the bridges can get, but I could tell you from experience. I did it many times. Glad to say no broken bones. So all of this is to say this is personal to me. I grew up in this neighborhood, so this is a labor of love. This is a passion project for me. Professionally speaking, we have a couple of architects, we have a couple of historians here. I'm the realtor in the group. So like any good realtor, I brought a relevant statistic. So in the state of Michigan, once an historic district is created, adjacent home values tend to jump between 6 to 35%. So thank your city commission and your mayor. Some of them are here this evening. You'll have the opportunity to do that later, I hope. But you have all made a little bit of money by this historic designation. Now, it has been alluded to already. There are a number of different government agencies involved in historic preservation. Of course, as everyone in this room knows, once multiple government agencies become involved, things move very quickly. Progress happens at the speed of light, and everything is fantastic. So at the federal level, we're talking about the National Park Service and which is a division of the Department of the Interior. The standards are set and developed by the Secretary of the Interior. And the purpose of those standards is to provide guidance to historic building owners and managers, preservation consultants, architects, contractors, and project reviewers prior to beginning work. So all of the work that has been done to this point is preamble. This is prologue. We are at the outset. The Secretary of the Interior sets standards that are maintained and overseen by the National Park Service. And the standards for the treatment of historic properties address 4 specific methods of treatment, which are preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. Using direct language from the Secretary of the Interior, preservation is the act of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of an historic project. This is what we are aiming for with the Vinsetta bridges. This is what we're hoping for. Rehabilitation is the act or process of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alterations, and additions while preserving the portions or features which convey its historical, cultural, or architectural values. This is more likely the treatment that we are going to use for the bridges. Rehabilitation is the preferred treatment for the Vinsetta bridges. Restoration is defined as the act or process of accurately depicting the form, features, and character of a property as it appeared at a particular period of time by means of the removal of features from other periods in its history and reconstruction of missing features from the restoration period. The limited and sensitive upgrading of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems is appropriate. Hopefully, we will not have to get there, but the Mayfield Bridge may require that. And reconstruction is defined as the act or process of depicting, by means of new construction, the form, features, and detail of a non-surviving site, structure, or object. All the bridges are still there. Are still there, so hopefully reconstruction will not need to be used. So then we have the state level. You've heard about SHPO. That's the State Historic Preservation Office. SHPO was created by the United States Congress in 1966 via the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. It requires each state to create an historic preservation office, and it requires the governor of each state to appoint an officer to oversee preservation activities. In 1970, Michigan Compiled Law, or MCL Act 169, was passed. This, by its definition on SHPO's literature, is an act to provide for the establishment of historic districts, the acquisition of certain resources for historic preservation purposes, preservation of historic and non-historic resources within certain districts, establishment of historic district commissions, maintenance of publicly owned resources, procedures, remedies, and penalties. So Michigan SHPO's main function is to provide technical assistance to local communities and to property owners in their efforts to identify, evaluate, designate, interpret, and protect Michigan's historic resources. It also administers incentive programs that include federal and state rehabilitation tax credits and pass-through grants available to certified local government communities. We'll get to that in just a moment. SHPO must also develop a statewide historic preservation plan every 5 years, which is informed by public input, and that is to identify broad preservation goals and priorities. It's led by the State Historic Preservation Officer, who's appointed by the governor. Then we move to the municipal level, which is the City of Royal Oak, which does happen to be a certified local government. The Certified Local Government, or CLG program, provides the framework for promoting, supporting, and enhancing historic preservation activities at the local level. It's jointly administered by the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office. And through the CLG program, communities partner with SHPO to plan for, protect, and tell the story of important historic places. In exchange for this, communities gain special access to exclusive grant funding opportunities, technical assistance from SHPO, and there are other benefits. Royal Oak became a certified local government in June of 2022 after receiving approval from the National Park Service and SHPO. The responsibilities of any CLG is that It must enforce the appropriate federal, state, and local legislation for the designation and protection of historic properties. It establishes and maintains an adequate and qualified Historic Preservation Review Commission, which is composed of professional and lay members. It maintains a system for the survey and inventory of local historic resources that furthers the purposes of the National Historic Preservation Act, provides for adequate public participation in the local government's historic preservation program, satisfactorily performs these responsibilities delegated to it under the NHPA, compliance with all federally and SHPO imposed requirements pertaining to the CLG program, and possibly most importantly, the submission of an annual report to SHPO not later than March 1st of each year. So the three relevant historic groups in Royal Oak that are working on this project are the Historic District Study Committee. The HDSC researches proposed historic districts for the purpose of historic preservation. Then there's the Historic District Commission. The HDC reviews all plans for construction, addition, alteration, repair, moving, excavation, and demolition of resources in an historic district. And then, of course, the subgroup, the Vinsetta Bridges Task Force. We were only established in May of this year, and there are 3 members each from the HDC and the HDSC. This is created to further study the bridges, solicit community input, and provide the City of Royal Oak recommendations as to how best to rehabilitate and or restore the new bridges, or I should say the Vinsetta bridges. So where we stand currently, we've touched on this a little bit. But the historic designation is the very first step. This is really square one. Without historic designation, nothing else would be possible to preserve these bridges. The designation ensures that we're working within all the guidelines and we're following the prescribed steps to be eligible for grants and such. The 3D as-is scans that you all have access to copies of, those were just completed in June. Those scans are going to provide the basis for future RFPs to structural engineers and preservation contractors. The structural engineer's assessment is needed for a few different reasons. First, we have to determine the structural integrity of the bridges. We need to know what kind of condition they're in so that we know how to move forward with the prescribed treatments from the National Park Service. We also need those to determine any public safety concerns. If you look at the Mayfield Bridge especially, you see there's obvious need for love, let's say. And we need to know whether or not that's actually a legitimate public safety concern. Of course, these are all going to provide baseline information for work that will need to be done. Of course, this work has to be done to the standards that are set by the National Park Service and the Secretary of the Interior. We can't just put up new concrete and call it a day. There are guidelines that we have to follow, especially if we're going to be applying for grant money in the future. So we also have made some connections, not only to Steve here, but to the Christman Brinker Group. You might have heard about a train station project that has happened recently. There might have been a train station that was restored in the city of Detroit. The Christman Brinker Group were the principals on that project. They were the group that was at the forefront of the restoration. We have made contact with them, and we are using them as a professional resource. So, the meat and potatoes, the next steps. Well, that's why we're here. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we have just as many questions as some of you. We do have a few answers, but why we're here is we need public input. We want to know, what does the community want done with these bridges? What do we all agree to? What do we think should happen? We are here to provide information to you so that you have the information, so that we are ensuring that the public is part of the process. Of course, we're also here to provide a channel through which we can get your input, because we want to know what the people physically nearest and with the most vested interest in the bridges have to say. Of course, moving forward, we hope to write an RFP for structural engineers and preservation contractors, and to apply for CLG grants and other grants that are available, so that we're making best use of our time and our efforts and monies that might be available. In the future, first and foremost, the structural integrity of the bridges has to be the primary focus. Making sure that these bridges stand for our children and our children's children and convey the character and the charm of the neighborhood for future generations is absolutely key. We're going to be having discussions about landscaping. There's already been some talk about perhaps installing solar lighting on the bridges. You've seen in a previous slide, and you'll see in a next slide, that lights were originally part of the bridges. It's possible that perhaps that could happen again. Maybe bringing some water features to the bridges, make it look as though not a river is flowing through, but perhaps bioswales or something that enhances the aesthetic appeal of the bridges. So these are the original lampposts that were on the bridges. This is at one of the homes that's now on Woodsboro Drive. So we're thinking perhaps there might be some interest in doing something like that. So, thank you for all of you being present. I would especially like to thank the HDSC and HDC members that are here. I'd like to thank Steve for his time. I'd like to thank the city commissioners that are here, without whom none of us would be here, and absolutely all of you in the community. We do have a little bit of time for public comment. If you come up to the podium, there's a timer that runs for 2 minutes. We just need to limit it to 2 minutes, if you please. But there are several avenues that you will have. You can speak to any of us. There's an email address that you can send questions and concerns to. And we're a very open group. We value public input greatly. We want to hear from you. Thank you.
I have a question for the audience, actually. So we understand that there was kind of a grassroots kind of group that would come together and repair the bridges. And, you know, that generation has passed, and we understand that possibly those forums are gone. But if anybody knows of past forums that are still around for grassroots repairs, we'd be interested in seeing them. I'm seeing a head shaking no, but this is just a verification. What?
Two of our neighbors did.
Yeah?
On Mayfield the last time that it was done.
Uh-huh.
And they were handymen, and they
Okay. Pushed
there
and
was
shoved.
plywood and there were props, and
Uh-huh.
they filled it in, and they smeared the cement, and
Yeah.
there wasn't any real form to it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's how I would do it.
It worked
Thanks.
for last year.
Yeah. So what do you think about the bridges as they are right now? Looks like Chris has something to say.
I'll break the ice here. I'm Chris Meister. I live at 266 Vinsetta, and very much applaud your efforts. Just want to say that, you know, from my experience with historic preservation, with my experience with historic preservation and doing anything, kind of like the more thorough we can be, the better. And so, you know, I don't know, you know, you mentioned some sort of a water element, things like that. I mean, I know that there's investigation on, you know, the why the drain was put in, the culvert was put in, I think back in the 60s. But, you know, it's put in probably for a reason. Is it still valid? But anything we can do to get back to being as close to the original with having the below grade parts of the bridges visible and stuff will just make it that much more better. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Tara Tumala, and I'm a resident in the area, and I walk and drive over these bridges daily. So thank you for all that you're doing to have an interest in helping them out, because they clearly need some help. But actually, like, my concern is less so about the condition of the bridges and more so about like how I'm curious, like, how at the same time we address the condition of the bridges, there might be opportunities to address the flooding and stormwater management in the neighborhood at the same time, because it might be a lost opportunity to restore the bridges while there's also water management issues in the neighborhood. So like the previous speaker, the commenter, I'm interested in like how we might also look at opportunities to potentially daylight that creek or river that was there, or install other features at the same time that would help manage that water. And then in addition, like, I understand the nostalgic nature of the lighting, the historic lighting features, but I think that there might be, I like it dark, honestly. It's hard to find like dark sky in a suburban location like ours. And I think if we were to install like new or like replacement kind of historical lighting features, it might be nice to also think about how we could also accommodate like the needs of like birds and nature and stuff like that, to have like a darker sky. So, thanks.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Southwood. I live at 1312 Vinsetta, which is right at the corner of Greenleaf. Firstly, thank you for all the work that you've done thus far. I'm super excited about this. We were thrilled 4 years ago to buy our home and love all of the history that comes with it. So we're thrilled about the opportunity for the bridges to be saved or reclaimed and, preserved. I think a couple of things. One is I would love to see as much of the bridges as possible. So as we go through that excavation process, I think restoring it to as much of its original glory would be amazing. I agree on the water issues. A lot of the neighbors are plagued by flooding backyards and things like that. And so it's just curious to think about if we are able to, remove some of what was filled in there, would that open up solutions to some of the flooding that happens? And then the last thing I wanted to say is that I think it would be amazing if we could begin to limit the potential damage that can be done to the bridges now. I know that some signs have been put up, but they're rather small that say like no tractors or trailers. From what I recall, that big area of damage on that Mayfield Bridge actually happened since the road was redone, and that bump out is there. And I believe that this is just gossip in the neighborhood, if you will, but I believe it happened from a lawn service company or construction company or some sort that had a trailer attached to the back of it, and it wasn't big enough, obviously, to make the turn and get through there. So I think any signage that could be put up with no trucks, et cetera, could be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will say that we're aware of that, and the task force is taking a look at different options.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Wolf. I have been at 1608 Vinsetta for 15 years, and we actually bought it from parents, so we hope to keep the home in the family. So thank you for what you're doing, because it's very important to us to keep the neighborhood like it is. One of the questions I think we had is just mentioned like the bump outs. I personally wasn't very happy. It actually happened in front of my yard, so that wasn't a positive thing for me. So with it being a historic district now, does that limit potential other changes on our street, not only with the bridges, but the areas around it, such bike lanes, other things that might happen? So I was just curious what that designation means to the area.
Well, I can say that the designation has boundaries to it. So it includes the bridges from Cedar Hill to, what's the next, Greenleaf? No, the last one, Mayfield. And then it includes the median, but it's to the curb. So we don't include the road, we don't include the houses. It's just strictly that, well, actually, Desmond showed that one strip and it's really just that strip, that's the boundary. So that's part of what we have to do when we turn in our report to the State Historic Preservation Office. We have to define a boundary. So the boundary has been defined, so it doesn't, this district doesn't go beyond that boundary. So take a look here in couple slides here. That one, that's pretty much the green strip with the bridges is
The boundary.
the boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. But otherwise, I echo the comments. I think it's great to restore them to their original, keep the neighborhood like it is, and I think it's a great thing you're doing, so thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jane Kosis. I still live in Royal Oak, but I grew up on Sunset Boulevard. And like Paul, I have great memories of riding my bike down Greenleaf and Woodsboro and Cedar Hill, going over those bridges. It was just the joy of childhood before cell phones and all that jazz. And we had to be home when the church bells rang at Shrine. But I would love to see those bridges restored to their original glory. And I agree with the comment about dark at night to support nature. We don't need lights on those bridges. That's just my opinion. And the other thing is, if you could keep them as close to original as possible, that would be awesome. And somehow I'm supporting all these other comments about keeping the trailers and the truck traffic off those bridges, because you know that's doing the damage. And they've got to turn around. If they go down long enough, they can turn around without going over those bridges. And I would encourage the commission, however way possible, to put some signage up that's a little bit more intense than what you have, so that people know that this is a historic district and it's in the process of preservation, and we don't want any further damage. Thank you all for your hard work. Much appreciated. Thank you.
There's a pretty cool car out front if anybody wants to look at it.
So what are next steps?
Well, we're not exactly sure, but
Well,
this is our big step, right? Getting
further public input is the next step. And then on our end, we'll be moving forward with discussions with the people we need to have discussions with about writing a request for a proposal for a structural engineer. That's likely the next step. And then having a structural engineer come out, assess the structural integrity of the bridges below ground as well, determining that. Because they're now historic, that was the very first step. So we really are at square one right now. Moving forward, we want to make sure that we're putting the horse in front of the cart. Because as Steve mentioned, we need to follow the guidelines that have been set by all of these governmental agencies to make sure that we're eligible for grant funding. We would like to get as much possible grant funding as possible so that it's not necessarily coming from the pockets of Royal Oak taxpayers.
As far as the further input from the public, does that mean those of us who are invited because we live in the area? Or is it to everybody? And I hate to say this, but there's always the, well, all those people over by Vinsetta, they get special privileges. They get better water drain covers, and is that something that you've ever thought about?
Absolutely. And we need to get as much public input as we can. And I can't necessarily speak for everybody here, but
I
go
can
ahead.
answer a little more. In addition to, you did receive a mailing. You have, as Paul pointed out, and by the way, I'm Carol Schwanger. I'm the staff liaison to the 3 historic groups. I work in the city manager's office. We sent to you, because you do have the most vested interest in the history. Many of you came up here and talked about, or, growing up and your homes are there. But this was all, as every meeting the city conducts, even our committee meetings, they're all public meetings, and they're all published on our website. And anybody who has an interest can go to our website and see these in many ways. They're on various different calendars, they're on our social media. So, you know, we make pushes all the time for people to sign up to receive push notifications, for texts and emails. So we do everything we can in the city to get the communication out. Sometimes the next step has to be the person who wants to receive the information to take that step. So, but definitely we're inviting everybody. This is not an exclusive meeting.
This one wasn't on the calendar.
It may have not been. You are correct about that, yes.
I looked at the calendar, and the way I verified it, we got a letter also, was in the minutes from your previous meeting.
We
Yes.
also are the ones that came to the meeting that was happening, and we knocked on the door out here, and the janitor said, "There's no meeting tonight."
Well, partly too, we're a task force, so we're kind of an ad hoc committee, so we're not,
But there,
I think
there was a
I
meeting.
think you're
Yeah, that one,
referring
that
to the
was-
public hearing, and yes.
Nobody out there knew, and we
that was,
left. I went over to the library and said, "Hey, can you check the,
Yeah,
the
sorry.
city listings and whatever?"
that was an error, that one.
That was an area, yes, we apologize for that, but we did open up the public comment on that via email, we did send that out. And this town hall, you're correct, I did not put it on the city calendar, and that was my failure, but it was published to the, we did have a publication on social media, and it was posted in City Hall. If we were to have a second one, yes, we would want to do this. We do want to keep this rather informal as well, but
So how do you suggest if we want to keep up to date on what's going on to make sure that we're looking for on the calendar? For like when this task force, or is it the commission meeting, like when?
why don't you send your emails to me? My email is on all the publications there. It's pretty simple. It's Carol, CAROLS, @romy.gov. And I'll start a group, and I'll get with IT to talk about how we can institute making that a push
I think it
group.
was on the letter that was sent out.
Yeah, it was on the letter, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. If there's nothing else, then we just want to thank you again for coming out. And again, you can always email me or call me in the city manager's office. I'm almost available 24/7, sadly. No, but I'm more than happy to listen to you or take an email anytime. It's an absolute pleasure to work for the city, and working with these three groups is one of the best parts of my job. So I'm really, really pleased to see the residents are so engaged with this project.
And again, Steve, I think you would like to show off your vehicle.
Yes, anybody's welcome to come out. Great stories behind the car, and get your phone out of your pocket and be happy to take your picture inside of it if you're interested. Okay? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.